you will remember, if you were watching, that one of the things that we looked at was the myth of comprehensible input, which I had totally expected this was going to be some really tough thing to refute, some really learned refutation, point by point of the input hypothesis or something like that. And wow, was it ever not. Wow. Like, totally not remotely that. Um, but it occurred to me, see, we talk about comprehensible input, and he was talking for a moment there about how supposedly comprehensible input is what discriminates against minority and marginalized languages because they don't have as much stuff written down, which was an interesting take. I would, as I said then, I would have thought that what discriminates against those languages is the fact that they are marginalized often by cultural genocide and things like that. But no, apparently it's the input hypothesis. But then I was thinking, and actually, there's a very interesting sort of a bit of a controlled experiment that history has given us on this very subject, and that is Irish and Welsh. Now, all the Celtic languages are either all but one are endangered, but one of them is just barely not endangered, and that's Welsh. Now, if you've been to Ireland, you've been to Wales, you probably notice there's a big difference in terms of indigenous language usage. Like, in Wales, actually, even in places that aren't particularly strongly Welsh-speaking, like Cardiff, for example, which is probably the most English place in Wales, you will randomly hear people just talking in Welsh. You will just randomly hear conversations in Welsh. Fairly often, in my experience, actually, that the tendency, my likelihood of just randomly, when I'm in town, hearing a conversation in Welsh was just gradually increasing for year on year. Which, when you're in, like, urban areas in Ireland, for the most part, is not the case. You can spend a fair bit of time in, like, Dublin or Limerick or Cork, just to name the three, and really just never hear anyone speaking Irish at all. And what's interesting is there's a difference here. I mean, these are two languages that are historically very much marginalized, historically targeted for eradication by, British imperialism, and one of them has actually been able to bounce back somewhat. And it occurred to me, actually, that if you look at certain areas of Ireland, not just the traditional well-talked areas either, where, there's some preservation effort, but not, it's quite inadequate. But also in part of West Belfast, which, if you go up on the Falls Road, there is what's called the Gaeltacht Quarter. And what you find is in these areas, Welsh, for example, actually has been able to bounce back. And in the Gaeltacht Quarter of Belfast, you also find, Irish, not Welsh. I mean, there are probably some Welsh speakers there, wouldn't surprise me. After all, the one person at a protest I went to in Dublin, the one person who could read a Welsh language t-shirt I had on was a guy from a trade union delegation from Fermanagh. So probably some Welsh speakers there, but I was talking about Irish. You can hear Irish spoken casually. You can go and, in your daily life, actually more or less live in Irish to a great extent in this one area. And the big difference between other urban areas of Ireland and the Gaeltacht Quarter of Belfast, and between Wales with Welsh and Ireland with Irish is how the language is taught to people. See, in Ireland, for the most part, and I'm talking about all 32 counties here, Irish is taught to people as a foreign language, and it is taught the way that foreign languages are traditionally taught in school, which is to say, badly. Very, very badly. And so so the effect of this is actually the experience you have a lot. You bring up the Irish language in Ireland, is lots of people who are embarrassed by how badly they speak it, and lots of talk about like the low-key trauma they experience with things like an mod conilioch, which is the conditional mood of the language, because it's being taught the way you would teach foreign languages, again, badly. Whereas in Wales, and also in Wales, one of the main sort of centerpieces of the language policy around Welsh has been Welsh medium education, which is to say they're not teaching you Welsh the crappy way that they would teach you like Spanish or French or something like that. They're just teaching your ordinary school curriculum through the medium of Welsh. So you take maths in Welsh, you're taking your PE in Welsh, your histories in Welsh, literature or whatever is in Welsh, biology, all that stuff is in Welsh, which is to say comprehensible input. Lots of comprehensible input, including a lot of compelling stuff. And on top of that, you've got like S4C, the Welsh language TV channel, where you can watch like sitcoms and dramas in Welsh. You can get the news in Welsh, you can get the weather in Welsh, there are documentaries in Welsh, there is like a fair bit of Welsh language radio in Wales as well. So and in addition to like signs being bilingual in a lot of places. So sometimes the signage isn't very well translated, unfortunately, but it's the attempt is there. But so you are being fairly bombarded with comprehensible Welsh input. And the result of all that has been bringing the language back from the brink, which it had been at for quite a long time. And in this Gaeltacht quarter, it occurred to me I hadn't really looked into this. I know about the Gaeltacht quarter because I visited it, because there's an Irish language bookstore and cultural space and restaurants called An Culturlan, or Culturlan, I heard it also pronounced by the taxi driver. And I have to say, one of the things about flying into Belfast and when you get a taxi from the airport, you don't actually know like what part of town your driver is going to be from. So like there's this low-key anxiety. I don't know, maybe this isn't something locals experience, but I was like, when I say I want to go to the Falls Road, like what am I going to hear from this cabbie about going to the Falls Road? Because that is a very distinct, like an area of outstanding natural republicanism, amongst other things. So some people would probably have adverse comment, but the cabbie I got was actually great. We had a wonderful conversation. But you can, in this general area, there's a lot of Irish being spoken. It's like one of the very few like urban areas, real urban areas in Ireland, anywhere where you can actually just casually hear people speaking in Irish. But I never really looked into like the situation in terms of like education and what like sort of activities were available through the medium of Irish. So I decided when I was having coffee, I would look at that. And what do you know? This is also where Irish medium education is very heavily concentrated, which is not to say that there's a huge amount of it, but there's just, compared to other comparable parts of the 32 counties, it is an area where there's a lot of it, relatively. Like, they've got an Irish medium primary school. They got Irish medium secondary schools. You can do like GAA. You can like play hurling. There are hurling teams and Gaelic football teams. You can play through where everybody's speaking Irish. In addition to, you got Irish language radio. You got Irish language cultural events. You got Irish language bookshops and stuff like that. And so again, comprehensible input. So, like, honestly, this Canguro guy, I mean, that was the wildest argument. I was never like, out of, if you had like asked me to predict what he was gonna like rest his case on, the idea that he would say, comprehensible input somehow discriminates against marginalized languages that have not which is like kind of the majority of the world's languages, incidentally. I never would have had that on my bingo card. But yeah, I mean, actually, comprehensible input would seem to be very distinctly, the key to why some of these languages are actually coming back from the brink. So, yeah, there's that.